This is the Spyderco Chapparal, and it is a tiny slicey knife that is priced extraordinarily well given what you get. So I've got two versions here. This bottom one is in FRN. This top one is in carbon fiber and G10 laminate. This one looks to be discontinued. This one is still around. There are other versions. You can get it in maple wood. You can get it in this Raffir Noble, this acrylic with seaweed in it. And the Spyderco Chapparal is one of Spyderco's smallest knives. It's made in their Taichung, Taiwan factory. And it is, I believe, the smallest knife, and I believe in this FRN version, also the cheapest knife that Taichung, Taiwan makes. And that brings up a lot of really interesting things in this design and in this execution that make it a really good entry point for Taichung and for Spyderco for a lot of people. And this ends up being a really good everyday carry and a knife that is going to be perfect for a lot of folks and what a lot of folks are looking for, even if it's not necessarily the best at some of the tasks that you're going to want to use it for. So let me explain what I mean by that. Let's focus on this FRN version because the FRN version is more exceptional. I love this carbon fiber and G10 version, but I'll talk about the differences between the two at the end. So Spyderco Chapparal here, this is a 2.8, I want to say it's 2.8 inch blade. If I compare this to, just before this I reviewed the Rockwell. If you look at blade to blade, about the same length as your Rockwell there. So relatively small blade, but it's not the length of the blade that makes it small. It's the thickness of the blade that makes it small. This is 80 thousandths, so 0.08 inches. It's a lock back here, and this is a 2-ounce knife. So you're getting about 3 inches, a little under 3 inches of blade in a 2-ounce knife. FRN handles here. FRN is done the way that Taichung typically does it. You got your modified volcano pattern. It gives you plenty of grip when you're sort of going against it. If I try to drag my finger back, it'll catch. If I try to go forward, it won't. Nice chamfer all the way around. The way Taichung tends to do their FRN, they will put chamfers on the edges. It's flat across the top. Same on both sides. It just works really well. It's nice. It looks nice. The pattern gives you some visual interest, and it's nice in the hand. You've got a nice, secure, squared off edge here, a little chamfer to take the hard edge off, and because of that, it feels good. One of the interesting features about this FRN handle here is so let's compare this to, and we'll make this comparison a bunch. The Chapparal is a tiny sage. That's the easiest way to think about the Chapparal. It's a tiny sage. So Sage, same pattern on the handle, same FRN handles. The Sage, you can flex it if you want to, and the Sage has that sort of, this is a tool feeling. It feels, I've said before, this feels like something you can get at Home Depot. Way more expensive than any knife at Home Depot, but it has that tool feeling. And with that FRN, because everything is so spaced apart, you can feel that flex a little bit, and it is enough that you feel the flex a tiny bit in use. This guy, because it's so thin and because it's so small, this is as secure as any G10 handle. There's no real flex here, and that's because your lever arm, wherever you're trying to squeeze it, you're always close to some hardware. So this FRN handle ends up feeling very secure. It ends up feeling more like a G10 handle than a lot of FRN handles do in terms of how stiff it is. But let's get back to this blade. This blade is your pretty typical Spyderco leaf shape. Again, almost the exact same blade shape as your Sage. Spyderco tends to do that. It's in that line. You got a nice thumb ramp across the back here with Taichung's typical jimping, which is short but sharp. You got a full finger choil here, short but sharp jimping. You can get your nice little pinch grip right there on the blade, super secure on it. You can clamber up, put your middle finger in that choil, grip the blade. Because this is such a small and thin blade, when you're gripping the blade like this, it kind of feels like a paring knife, especially if you know sort of Japanese style chef knives. When you can grip them in this grip where you're gripping the blade, you got an immense amount of control over that edge. And I'll often use my Chapparal, especially for smaller tasks like this or even like this, where I just feel like I'm very close to that edge. I have lots of control over that edge. But the thing that makes the Chapparal exceptional, well, one of the things, is this blade stock. 80 thousandths with a full flat grind that is relatively tall. This thing slices like you wouldn't believe, especially with a good sharpened edge on it. This thing is even slicier than the Atom. And you know, if you look at the blade stocks, it's one of the few knives that makes the Atom start to look a little thick, because it's actually thinner blade stock than the Atom. And Spyderco puts better flat grinds on their knives than TRM does. This is going to be one of the sliciest blades in your collection. And that's part of what Spyderco meant for this knife to be. There's a tiny little knife with a blade that will just cut extraordinarily well. There is nothing about this blade that is well adapted for hard use. You don't want stock this thin. You don't want to push it. You wouldn't even think to do that with a knife of this size. But for pure slicing performance, cutting down into stuff, cutting across into stuff, cutting through tape, paper, cardboard, gardening, all that sort of stuff, you're not going to have many slicier knives in your collection than the Chapparal, while still having that secure grip, that control over the blade that leaf-shaped blade gives you. You can even put your thumb in the Spidey hole here and grip it that way. It works really nicely. The tip is really natural for piercing, right in line with the pivot, so if you want to pierce into something and drag down, it's just a very natural blade shape that happens to cut extraordinarily well. This one, and I believe all Chapparals, are in CTS XHP, which is a very good steel. People talk about it as turbocharged D2. It's kind of like F35VN in that it is an all-around steel. It is pretty tough, but not the toughest. It has pretty good edge retention, but not the best. It has pretty good corrosion resistance, but not the best. It is a fine steel. Lots of custom makers really, really like it. You're not going to have an issue with XHP. It's not going to give you exceptional performance in any domain, but it is fine. And for what you're going to be using this knife for, which is generally lighter duty tasks, it is going to be, if anything, more than fine. So that's your blade, which is exceptionally slicey. Has nice jimping, has nice grip. Let's go back to the handle here. I already talked about these efferent scales, which are very well done. Very nicely machined, very nicely designed. This extra little cutout in the chamfer, or in the finger choil here, is welcome. Just makes it a little bit more comfortable to grip down like that, or to grip down like that. Let's go to this back lock, because it is a back lock. You know, you drop it here, it does drop shut. So it is a really nicely designed back lock that you can just press down and it will basically free fall. And this is a smooth backlock action, incredibly smooth backlock action the whole way through. The only resistance that I'm feeling is the natural spring of that backlock. There is no resistance in this pivot. Feels very similar to a Swayback or a Techno or the Marcin Swish pieces, which are also out of Taichung. So they're probably doing things quite similarly in terms of how they're setting this up and how they're getting it so smooth, you know, very flat blade, very flat scale, stuff like that. But this is a very nice, smooth backlock, very secure, great lockup, not a hint of play. The mating is really nice. The way this backlock, you know, mates into the handle and all that, they even put a little, look at that, they put a little chamfer on the edge of the backlock there just to make it a little easier to get your finger onto. Did they do that on this other one too? Yeah, they did. I never noticed that before. But this is a very nicely designed backlock. People say this is pinchy. I have never had that issue. I've sat around, you know, opening and closing this knife for a while like this. I've never had an issue with this backlock being pinchy. Yes, it's thin. That's because the blade stock's thin. The backlock's going to be as thick as the blade stock. If you want thin blade stock with a backlock, you're going to have a thin backlock. I sit around on the computer all day. It's not like I've got workers' hands, and I have never had an issue with this backlock being pinchy or uncomfortable. Is it thinner than a native backlock? Yeah. So what? The fact is, I've never had an issue with the backlock, and this backlock is so immaculately executed that it just feels super secure. It's satisfying to use. You get that really nice click, every single time it opens. It's really well done. You've got your standard spring clip here. If you've used them before, you've got an opinion about it. Super practical. It does have a tendency to get caught on stuff. But when you think about, okay, so we've gone through all the details, big picture on this knife. It's so small. It's so thin. When I fold this up, let me compare this to my Sage. I mean, it makes the Sage look like a tank. It's not even that much smaller in this profile, though it certainly is. But it's, 3/4 the size of the Sage in this profile. But when you turn on its side, I mean, it's about 2/3 the thickness, but it feels so much smaller in the pocket because of how much thinner it is. And then that blade stock is way thinner. This is a slicey, tiny Sage. And this thing can fit in your dress pants pocket. This thing can fit in a chest pocket. This thing can fit in a jacket pocket. This is a knife that, because it's only 2 ounces, and because it's that thin, can fit anywhere. It's just, and because it's so nicely done, because the construction is so refined everywhere, from the, the really nice even blade grind that Taichung puts on there, the fact that all the edges are sharp. I don't mean in the sharp owie way, I mean in the way that everything is crisp, the way the screws are flush, the way this backlock is neatly seated. This looks and feels like a premium object. This looks and feels refined. This looks and feels elegant. And then in a second, I'll bring this guy out, but even more in some of the other versions in this FRN version. That means this is a knife that ends up being very versatile socially, and very versatile in terms of how and where you would feel comfortable carrying this. This will fit in whatever your outfit is for the day, however you are taking on the day. You will find a place to put the Chapparal, and you will have a supremely slicey knife at your side if you need it. This is also a knife that is very good to hand to people as far as knives go, because it does feel so refined, because it does feel nice. This is an object that anybody who picks it up will be like, will just think it's nice, think it's a nice object again, especially when you go into some of these other versions. And the crazy part is that you're getting all the quality of a Taichung Spyderco for like $120 in this FRN version, which is ridiculous. Taichung is Spyderco's tightest and highest quality factory in terms of tolerances, consistency, QC, etc. And you see everything that Taichung does well in this knife. You see those razor sharp edges, or those crisp edges. You see those tight tolerances. And yet they're doing it at a price point that is way lower than anything coming at scale out of Golden, Colorado, and is approaching the sorts of prices that you get from, Seki City knives from Spyderco, which are not trying to have that level of refinement. And so you end up with a knife that not only is very small, very pocketable, and very slicey, but that gets you a knife that looks and feels way more premium than what you're paying for it. If I compare this, I'll bring my Native back out. Now, these are not really comparable knives. They're both 3-inch knives, but this is way heavier duty than this one. Not nearly as slicey, but can be pushed way harder. They're not trying to compete with one another. This Chapparal feels like a nicer knife than the Native, despite the fact that the Native is more expensive. And that's a lot of what makes the Chapparal really feel exceptional, is when you take the quality of the execution, along with the carryability, along with the ease of use, along with that cutting performance, and then you look at that all in the context of the price, and this ends up looking like a really exceptional buy. And this is sort of Taichung Spyderco at their very best. Now, you can get other versions of this as well. These start to get a little pricier. If you get it with, these are carbon fiber G10 scales. These are now discontinued. I think this was around $150, $160 when it was out. The versions with maple wood scales and the versions with the raffia, the sort of seaweed in acrylic, those get closer to $200. Those are very pretty. Those are elegant and gentlemanly in a way that Spyderco usually doesn't do. and you're paying for that. You know, it's sort of like when you get a wood inlaid Sabenta. You're paying a premium purely for looks and for a perception of elegance, but you're also going to get a more elegant knife than anything else Spyderco makes. And you're going to get it still for not that bad a price, and you're still going to get a lightweight knife, not quite as light as this FRN, but that is still light and easy to carry. You know, if I look at these, the G10 version is no thicker. It looks a little bit thicker, but actually, I mean, it might be the tiniest bit thicker, or that could just be, I think I'm just fooling myself with my eyes there. It looks thicker, but that's only because they got full inset steel on either side of your back spacer here. This one is 2.5 ounces, this one is 2. This one feels quite a bit heavier because the knife is so small. But if anything, the action's even better on this one. The action is just smooth as butter. This one needs to break in a little bit more. I haven't carried it quite as much because this one is just practically better. But there are versions of this that take the elegance angle even further, and this becomes as good a gentleman's carry as anything like a, you know, Chris Reeve Menandi or something like that. Does it feel quite as high-end? No, but who cares? This is still a nice enough knife that you can hand it to anybody, and they will be impressed by its design and its execution, and then impressed even more when they actually use it to cut something, because it cuts like crazy. And that's really where the Chapparal is. Now, there's one last thing I have to say about the Chapparal, and I did a whole video about this, so I'll be quick, but I do have to bring out the Dragonfly comparison. Because the problem comes in if you were to ask me, okay, do I recommend the Chapparal? And I'll go through the negative first. The problem is the Dragonfly exists. The Dragonfly is an even smaller knife with an even better blade shape. I mean, this blade shape, the way that you can pinch into the Dragonfly, get a grip on that blade, and this really drop point is just supreme for small tasks. The ergonomics, this is an ergonomic masterpiece, the way they've designed this handle to get so much ergonomic purchase out of such a small handle. And then on top of that, it is smaller. It tends to come in better blade steels. This one's super blue. It also comes in K390, and it's cheaper. And even though the blade's a little shorter, it's just as capable for any task you would need as the Chapparal. And so, as I said in my extended comparison between these two, from any practical perspective, I will prefer the Dragonfly over the Chapparal. I believe the Dragonfly can do everything that the Chapparal can do. It does a lot of things better because of how extraordinary that blade and those ergonomics are, and it does it all in a smaller and cheaper package. From every objective, practical lens, the Dragonfly is a better knife than the Chapparal. But the Dragonfly is unrefined. You know, this doesn't look like a high-quality object, even though, you know, it's still a $100 knife. It's not cheap. But this doesn't look like a high-quality object. This doesn't feel like a high-quality object. This feels like a tool. It's nowhere near as refined as the Chapparal is. And so if you're asking me, do I recommend the Chapparal? It's a conditional yes. If you are somebody that all you care about is getting the best, highest performance 3-inch knife that you can, especially if you want that out of Spyderco, then there's no way that the Chapparal outperforms the Dragonfly. And when you consider that the Chapparal is also bigger and more expensive, go with the Dragonfly if all you care about is performance. But if you want something that still has that great ease of carry, that small size, that great cutting performance, you know, and you just want that lightweight thing that you can have in your pocket, on your person, in your desk, wherever, that is going to cut any light duty thing you need it to, and is going to cut it extraordinarily well, and you care about looks and refinement, and you want a nice, refined object, then the level of refinement that you're seeing in both the design and execution on the Chapparal blows the Dragonfly out of the water. And again, even though these, you know, this carbon fiber version, the maple version, things like that are nicer, I can't get past for $120 how good a knife this is for $120, how good the execution is for $120. I mean, you're paying the sorts of prices that from Chinese makers, you're getting basic G10 handles that are, you know, flat-sided and kind of cobbled together. You know, if you're looking, that's the very, very bottom of anything that we put together. Riot doesn't even play in that price range. You're at, frankly, the top end of Civivi at $120, and none of them are producing anything at this level of refinement and quality as the Chapparal. This, if you want a refined tiny knife, this is an exceptional option. And that is really the person that I would recommend the Chapparal for. If you do care about those looks, you do care about that feel, you want it to feel refined, you want it to feel nicely put together, Taichung's got your back. And the fact that Taichung is putting this out at this price point and is doing this FRN handle and this blade as well as they are, and that they didn't take a tiny knife and they didn't compromise, that is where the Chapparal really excels. And so if you're somebody who wants all that, go get a Chapparal. You will very much enjoy it. If you just want practical use, I still like the Dragonfly a little bit better, but you'll be happy with both. Neither one's a bad knife. Hope that was a good use of your time, and I will see you again soon.